If you save your first $100,000 and still keep thinking like a poor person, that money will not save you. It will just sit there. Or worse, it will leak away while you congratulate yourself for having reached a milestone. That is the truth. Nobody likes hearing. People treat $100,000 like a finish line. I do not. I treat it like ignition because the first $100,000 is not where your financial life ends. It is where money finally starts learning how to work harder than you do. That is why the first $100,000 matters so much. Not because it makes you rich overnight, not because it gives you a glamorous life, not because you can suddenly stop caring. It matters because it is the first moment when your capital can begin producing results large enough to change the shape of your future. Most people never get there, and that is exactly why I want to start here. The source document opens with the right hook. It says saving your first $100,000 is not a random number, but a tipping point. The first true taste of financial freedom, the moment when money starts to work for you, confidence grows and options multiply. Fay file site Fay turn 29. File 0 Fay, that is exactly right. I have always believed that people misunderstand what freedom looks like when it first arrives. They imagine fireworks, they imagine some visible transformation, they imagine they will wake up different. The first real stage of freedom is quieter than that. It is the moment when every small financial decision stops feeling like a miniature emergency. It is the moment when a bill no longer feels like a threat to your identity. It is the moment when one mistake no longer knocks you flat. It is the moment when your money becomes a moat instead of a puddle. That is what the first $100,000 really buys. It buys breathing room, it buys confidence, it buys options, it buys time. And if you know what to do next, it buys acceleration. Now, before I go further, I want to crush one of the dumbest myths in modern finance. The source does this early, and it is right to do so. It says people constantly claim that if they just earned more, all their money problems would disappear, and then it turns around and says that is wrong. The real problem is not just how much you earn. It is what you do with the money when it arrives. Fay file site Fay turn 29, file 0 Fay. That is one of the biggest truths in personal finance. Because high income can disguise low control. A person can earn well and still live in financial panic. The source gives a striking statistic for this point. It says 1 in 3 households earning between $100,000 and $150,000 a year still worry about paying bills. Fay file site Fay turn 29, file 0 Fay. That should tell you everything income solves some problems. It does not solve structural stupidity. If you earn more and every extra dollar walks straight out the front door wearing the costume of a bigger house, a nicer car, more delivery, more travel, more status, more monthly commitments, then you are not getting richer. You are just becoming a higher volume spender. That is not wealth, that is throughput. And throughput is not what changes your life. The source says this very clearly too. It points out that when people imagine earning more, they almost never imagine that money quietly compounding in the background. They imagine what they can upgrade right now. Fay file site Fay turn 29, file 0 Fay. Exactly. That is how people get trapped. They confuse income with permission, and then they use every raise to expand the lifestyle that keeps them dependent. That is why I've always said there are 2 skills, not one. The skill of earning and the skill of keeping. The source says something close to that too. It makes clear that more income alone will not get you to 100,000, and that the real engine is a system that lets you spend extravagantly on what you love while cutting costs mercilessly on what you do not. Fay file site Fay turn 29, file 0 Fay. That is the correct philosophy. I am not interested in some monk like life where every pleasure gets cut out and every decision is measured in pennies. That is not a rich life. But neither is the opposite, where a person spends impulsively and then calls it living. I want something much better. I want a person to live richly today and even more richly tomorrow. That means conscious trade-offs, not guilt. Trade-offs: spend heavily on what matters, cut brutally on what does not. That is adulthood. Now let us go to the next idea, because this is where the story gets interesting. The first 100,000 is the hardest. The source says this explicitly and then immediately explains why. It says once you invest that first 100,000, your net worth starts growing faster because compound interest begins doing real work. It even walks through an example of investing $600 a month at a 7% return and reaching over $102,000 in 10 years, despite only contributing $72,000 directly. The rest comes from compounding. Fay file site Fay turn 29, file 0 Fay. That is the great turning point. The first 100,000 is hard because up until then you are still doing almost all the lifting yourself. Your paycheck is the engine. Your savings rate is the engine. Your discipline is the engine. Your capital is still too small to carry much of its own weight. But once the capital gets large enough, the machine begins helping, and the more it helps, the less every future dollar depends exclusively on your next hour of labor. That is what compounding actually feels like in real life, not a textbook formula. A shift in burden. At the beginning, you carry the money. Later, the money begins carrying part of you. The source explains this beautifully when it says that by the time you hit $1 million, nearly 70% of the total balance came from investment growth rather than direct contributions. Fay file site Fay turn 29 file 0 Fay. That is the dream. Not because the number is pretty, because the source of power has changed. You are no longer trying to outrun life only with work. Now you have an asset base that assists you. That is why 100,000 is not just a milestone. It is the first turning of the gears. Now let us talk about the biggest force preventing most people from ever getting there. Debt. The source does not waste time pretending. This part is glamorous. It says high. Interest debt is the one place where speed truly matters, because compound interest is working against you instead of for you. It even compares debt to running a race while wearing a 200-pound weight vest. Fay file site Fay turn 29 file 0 Fay. That is exactly right. I do not care how clever your investment plan sounds if you are dragging around high interest credit card debt. A 27% credit card interest rate is not a side issue. The source says that rate can wipe out your investment gains and destroy wealth faster than most plans can fix it. Fay file site Fay turn 29 file 0 Fay. That is not an exaggeration. That is math. People get bored hearing about debt. Fine, boredom does not change arithmetic. If your investments are trying to grow at 7 or 10% while your card balance is exploding at 20+%, then your financial system is not moving forward, it is choking. This is why I would tell anyone trying to reach 100,000 from scratch to get serious about the foundation first. Kill the high interest debt, not eventually. Now, because until that weight comes off your back, every good idea has to drag a chain. Now, once the debt is gone, something beautiful happens. The source says that when the debt is removed, the money that was going to banks and credit card companies can finally be allocated toward investing, which speeds up wealth building dramatically. Fay file site Fay turn 29 file 0 Fay. Exactly. That is what freedom looks like at first, not luxury redirection. Money that used to serve the past begins serving the future. That is the shift. Now let us talk about systems, because the source is strongest here, and I agree with it completely. It introduces what it calls the CEO system: cut costs, earn more, and optimize your finances. Fay file site Fay turn 29 file 0 Fay. That is exactly the right sequence. I like systems because I do not want to renegotiate with myself every morning. Willpower is overrated. A good system beats a strong mood. So let us start with C, cut costs. Not everywhere, not randomly, not performatively. The source makes this point forcefully. It says you should cut costs mercilessly on the things you do not care about in order to spend more on the things you do. It even mocks the pointless obsession with tiny habits that do not move the needle, like reusing paper towels or obsessing over beet salad. Fay file site Fay turn 29 file 0 Fay. That is exactly right. I do not want you playing poor. I want you making clean decisions. If you do not care about flashy clothes, good, cut there. If you do not care about a bigger car, good, cut there. If you do not care about premium phone upgrades, good, cut there. But if travel matters deeply, spend there. If beautiful food matters, spend there. If kids' activities matter, spend there. The point is not to cut. The point is to choose. That is why the source attacks the lazy phrase, "What if I love everything?" It says you do not love everything equally. You are just refusing to make trade-offs. Fay file site Fay turn 29 file 0 Fay. That is one of the most useful lines in the whole piece. A rich life is built from honest trade-offs, not from pretending every category matters equally. Now the second part of the system is E, earn more. The source says income alone will not make you rich, but that earning more is still a skill and an important part of the system. It explicitly rejects trivial side hustles that make almost no difference, and instead emphasizes building the real skill of earning more through raises, better resumes, better interviews, or business building. Fay file site Fay turn 29 file 0 Fay. That is exactly right. A lot of people think earning more is something that either happens to you or does not. Number it as a learnable skill. Negotiating better, selling better, interviewing better, positioning yourself better, building a side business, packaging expertise, creating value people will actually pay for. These are skills, and when people stop treating income as fixed and start treating it as expandable, the whole wealth building path changes. Now let us go to the last letter, optimize. This is where most people get lost in complexity when they should be embracing simplicity. The source says optimization starts with automation flow. It explains that money should move automatically from paycheck into savings and investments, leaving a clean amount for guilt. Free spending so that you are not manually deciding every month where money goes. Fay file a site, Fay turn 29, file 0 Fay. That is exactly how adults should do it. Money should flow like water, not like a courtroom argument. The source uses that exact metaphor, saying money flows automatically to savings, investments, and even guilt. Free spending, Fay file a site, Fay turn 29, file 0 Fay. That is what I want. Automation is not laziness. It is power, because every month you leave money decisions fully manual. You invite mood, fatigue, desire, fear, and distraction to become your portfolio manager. That is a terrible idea. I want the transfers happening before you have time to explain why this month is special and why maybe you will save next month instead. The source even says that with the right automation flow you can spend guilt. Free because you already know savings and investments were handled first. Fay file a site, Fay turn 29, file 0 Fay. Exactly. That is a rich life. Not one where every coffee becomes a moral crisis. One where the future was already funded and the present can now be enjoyed. Honestly, now let us go to one of the most powerful tactics in the entire document, the 1% December rule. The source explains it simply. If you are currently investing 10% of your income, increase it by just 1% every December. That change is small enough that most people barely feel it. And because it is percentage-based, the amount scales naturally as income grows. It even notes that some brokerages let you automate these annual increases. Fay file a site, Fay turn 29, file 0 Fay. That is a beautiful tactic. Why? Because it respects reality. It does not require heroism. It requires ratchets. 1% is small enough not to trigger panic, and repeated small increases can eventually be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. The source says exactly that. Fay file a site, Fay turn 29, file 0 Fay. This is how wealth is often built, not with one dramatic act. With decisions so small they barely hurt, repeated so long they become enormous. Now let us talk about the moat. This part matters because even good systems fail when life gets a vote. The source says your financial moat is 3 to 6 months of living expenses held in an emergency fund, and that it should be accessible, liquid, and reserved for real emergencies. It defines living expenses as fixed costs plus a buffer, and warns clearly that emergency money should not be invested. Fay file a site, Fay turn 29, file 0 Fay. That is exactly right. Warren Buffett once said Berkshire was structured so it would never run out of money. The source references that line and uses it to frame the idea of building a personal moat. Fay file site, Fay turn 29, file 0 Fay. That is the right aspiration, not perfection, resilience. Without a moat, every surprise pushes you backward. A car repair, a medical bill, a job shock, a family emergency. Without liquidity, you end up raiding investments or sliding back into debt. That is how people keep rebuilding the same crisis. So yes, invest aggressively, but not with the emergency fund that money has a different job. Its job is not to grow fast. Its job is to protect the system. Now, let us go to where your investments should actually live. The source says the speaker personally invests the vast majority of net worth in index funds and target date funds. It explains index funds as diversified baskets of stocks and target date funds as one-fund solutions that automatically become more conservative as retirement approaches. It also emphasizes low cost as the central principle. Fay file a site, Fay turn 29, file 0 Fay. That is exactly right. Simple, low cost diversified, automatic. That combination is hard to beat. People love complexity because complexity flatters the ego, but the source makes a devastating point with fees. It shows that for a 30-year-old investing $50,000 up front and another $1,000 per month over 35 years, the difference between paying 0.2% and 1% in fees can approach $400,000. Fay file a site, Fay turn 29, file 0 Fay. That should make everybody angry. People waste energy clipping tiny coupons and then donate hundreds of thousands to fee drag because the cost felt abstract. Number costs matter a lot, especially over long periods. Now let us talk about community, because this is another place where wealthy behavior gets normalized or destroyed. The source says you should stop asking broke people for money advice and start surrounding yourself in person or digitally with people who normalize sustainable wealth building. It also notes that many people cannot even name one person they know who is good with money. Fei Filocyte Fei Turn 29 File 0 Fei. That is a bigger problem than most people realize. If nobody around you models calm wealth building behavior, then financial chaos starts looking normal. Impulse becomes normal. Debt becomes normal. Lifestyle inflation becomes normal. Not investing becomes normal. You need to expose yourself to different norms that matters. Now we arrive at the trap section, which I think the source handles beautifully because it warns against both extremes. First, get rich quick culture. The source explicitly criticizes meme stocks, sloppy Airbnb fantasies, and social media hustle culture that glorifies no sleep and hyperactivity. It says real wealth is almost always built through smart systems that take time. Fei Filocyte Fei Turn 29 File 0 Fei. That is exactly right. Wealth built slowly survives. Wealth chased quickly often disappears quickly too. Now the second trap is one I appreciate very much. Toxic frugality extremism. The source attacks the performative version of saving that obsesses over walking miles to avoid tiny costs or saving 70% for years purely to brag about retiring early on the internet. It argues instead for learning both the skill of saving and the skill of spending. Fei Filocyte Fei Turn 29 File 0 Fei. That is exactly my philosophy. I do not want a rich life later bought by a miserable life now. I want both done intelligently. Now the third trap is one that ruins more futures than people admit. I missed my chance. The source says many people consume good financial information and then use it as a reason to feel bad for not starting earlier. It rejects that response and says you cannot rewind time, but you can stop making the same mistake twice by starting today. Fei Filocyte Fei Turn 29 File 0 Fei. That is exactly right. Regret is useless unless it turns into movement. Now the fourth trap is over. Optimization. The source criticizes the obsession with tiny hacks, constant tweaking, and squeezing a fraction of a percent here or there while missing the real point of money. It says the system should be set up and then left alone while you go live your rich life. Fei Filocyte Fei Turn 29 File 0 Fei. That is exactly right. Money is not there to become your full-time hobby unless finance is literally your profession. It is there to support a life, build the structure, then let the structure run. Now let me gather the whole lesson. If I were trying to build my first 100,000 from scratch, I would not start with fantasy. I would start with systems, kill the high-interest debt, cut mercilessly where I do not care. Earn more by building the skill of earning more. Automate money so savings and investing happen before life can interfere. Use the 1% December increase to keep pressing the system upward. Build a moat so life cannot knock me back into debt every time it acts like life. Put the bulk of long-term investments into low-cost index funds or target date funds. Surround myself with people who normalize wealth, building instead of chaos. Ignore the get-rich-quick clowns. Ignore the extreme frugality clowns. Ignore the optimization clowns. And above all, remember what 100,000 actually is. Not a vanity metric. A tipping point, a machine. The first serious moment when money starts to work hard enough that the future can look different from the past. That is why the first 100,000 matters so much. And that is why, once you understand it properly, you stop admiring the goal and start building the system that gets you there. That is how ordinary people become wealthy. Not by magic, by design.